Hello everyone, this is Pushpoint, and I am your storyteller. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. Like the video and subscribe the channel.
After where are you from and what time you are watching now, get comfortable and relax. Story 1. Whispers beneath the old mill. The rain had been falling steadily for hours when Evelyn finally reached the edge of the small, forgotten village.
The gravel road was slick, the cold seeping into her bones as she trudged forward, her boots sinking slightly into the mud with each step. She didn't want to be here,
But the letter she'd received, that fragile yellowed note, written in shaky script, had drawn her like a moth to a flame. It said simply, "Find the mill.
find the truth.
Before it's too late."
Evelyn had no memory of the village from her childhood, but something deep within tugged her onward, past the leaning houses with their shuttered windows and the hollow-eyed scarecrows in the fields.
The sky darkened, clouds thickening like wet wool. The only sound was the rain, drumming relentlessly against the crumbling facades and the twisted trees lining the road.
Ahead, the old mill loomed.
Its wooden frame was splintered and blackened by time, the wheels silent and moss-covered.
It had been abandoned for decades, whispered about by the villagers as cursed, a place where shadows moved of their own accord and voices drifted on the wind. Evelyn paused at the threshold, the door hanging open as if inviting her inside. The air shifted, cold and heavy, like the breath of something unseen. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she stepped inside. The interior was dark, save for the muted light filtering through shattered windows.
Dust motes danced in the still air, disturbed by her cautious movements.
The scent of damp wood and rock filled her nostrils.
A faint, rhythmic creaking echoed from the upper floors, the wheel, perhaps, still turning somewhere in the darkness.
She found a spiral staircase,
its wooden steps groaning beneath her weight. As she climbed, the rain outside intensified, the pattering turning to a roar that seemed to drown out the world beyond these walls.
The upper room was a small attic, cluttered with broken machinery and fragments of old journals.
One journal caught her eye, bound in cracked leather and yellowed with age. She opened it with trembling fingers.
The scrawled entries spoke of the mill's last days of disappearances, strange lights, voices calling in the night, and a presence that lingered just beyond sight.
The final entry was smudged, as if the writer had been interrupted.
Suddenly, the room grew colder. The shadows deepened, lengthening unnaturally, twisting around her like grasping fingers. A whisper brushed her ear, faint, unintelligible, yet filled with unmistakable urgency. She spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Evelyn's breath came in ragged gasps as the whispers grew louder, merging into a chorus of desperate voices. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing with a life of their own. She stumbled back toward the staircase, but the steps were gone, replaced by an endless black void. Panic surged. She turned to run, but the attic door slammed shut, sealing her inside. The whispers crescendoed into a maddening symphony. Shapes flickered in the shadows, pale faces pressed against unseen windows, eyes hollow and accusing. In the final moments before the darkness claimed her, Evelyn understood the mill didn't want to be found.
It wanted to keep its secrets and its prisoners forever.
Outside, the rain continued, indifferent and endless, washing away footprints, erasing evidence of those who dared to enter.
Story 2. The lighthouse at Hollow Bay.
The fog rolled in thick from the sea, swallowing the jagged cliffs of Hollow Bay in a cold, clammy shroud. Jonas had arrived just before dusk, the old lighthouse looming above him like a silent sentinel. Its paint was peeling, the glass cracked and misted, but the light still rotated in sluggish, uneven sweeps. He had taken the job as the lighthouse keeper out of desperation, a solitary, unpaid position offered by a remote coastal authority, far from the chaos of the city.
Just 3 weeks of isolation in exchange for a small stipend.
Jonas thought it would be a chance to escape his restless mind, to find some peace.
But peace was the last thing he found.
On his first night, the storm came, a low rumble in the distance that soon turned into a savage howl, rain lashing the windows with unrelenting fury. He secured the shutters and lit a fire in the hearth, but the howling wind seemed to seep through the cracks in the walls, carrying faint, distorted sounds. At first,
It was just strange noises, the creak of wood, the distant crash of waves, the whisper of wind through broken panes. But then he heard it, a soft tapping on the glass, like fingernails lightly drumming in the dark.
Jonas pressed his face to the cold window pane, but the fog was too thick to see anything beyond the cliff's edge. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, mournful humming that seemed to drift through the stone walls. The night stretched on, each one heavier than the last. Shadows lengthened and shifted just beyond the glow of his lantern.
He found strange symbols carved into the wooden beams of the lighthouse, spirals and jagged lines, faint but deliberate. One evening, the light in the lantern began to flicker uncontrollably, plunging the room into darkness before reigniting.
Jonas swore he saw a figure standing at the base of the tower, tall, draped in dripping seaweed, face obscured by a hood of tangled hair. He spun around, heart racing, but the room was empty. Sleep became impossible.
His dreams were invaded by crashing waves and the soft chant of a voice that whispered his name in the tongue of the sea.
On the final night, as the storm reached a frenzy, Jonas climbed to the lantern room. Compelled by a force he couldn't resist, the fog outside parted like a curtain, revealing a vast, boiling ocean that stretched beyond the edge of the world.
In the light's reflection, he saw them dozens of faces beneath the waves, eyes black and hollow, mouths opening in silent screams.
The figure appeared, now at his side, cold and dripping. It whispered, "Join us."
Forever beneath the tide.
Jonas reached out, but the light snapped out, plunging him into darkness.
When the fog cleared the next morning, the lighthouse stood empty, its light extinguished. No sign of Jonas remained, only the faintest echo of a lonely, haunted hum carried by the sea breeze. Story 3. The last train to Black Hollow.
The platform was deserted except for a single figure, Heller, standing beneath the flickering lamplight. The night air was thick with mist, the sound of distant thunder rolling across the hills. The sign read Black Hollow Station, a place most had forgotten, a place Caleb wished he never had to return to.
He'd come back to collect something lost, something he had buried deep inside himself years ago.
The train was late, its arrival marked only by the soft clatter of wheels and the low rumble, swallowed quickly by the fog.
Caleb stepped aboard, the carriage dim and smelling of old leather and dust.
There were no other passengers, just empty seats stretching into shadowed corners.
The windows blurred with condensation, distorting the outside world into a shifting grey haze.
As the train pulled away, Caleb noticed the landscape changing, not the rolling countryside he expected, with dense woods closing in like walls of dark glass. The trees seemed to lean inward, branches scraping the carriage like skeletal fingers. The lights inside flickered erratically.
Caleb tried to shake off the creeping dread as the train entered a tunnel, its length stretching beyond reason, swallowing sound and light.
When the train emerged, the world outside was different. The station signs were in a language Caleb couldn't read, the air thick with an unnatural chill that settled into his bones. Whispers echoed through the carriage, barely audible, a murmur beneath the hum of the train. Voices calling names Caleb didn't recognize, and sometimes his own name, drawn out like a warning. He stood, moving toward the door at the end of the carriage.
Behind it, a narrow corridor spiraled downward, the faint scent of damp earth and decay filling the air.
He descended, each step heavier than the last, until the train's noise faded and was replaced by silence. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a cavernous underground station. The walls dripped with cold water, and flickering lamps cast grotesque shadows. Rusted tracks led into darkness that seemed to breathe.
Caleb's breath caught as figures emerged, pale, gaunt, eyes wide and unblinking.
They didn't move but stared, their gaze empty and accusing.
Among them, a child's face, twisted in sorrow, watched him silently. He tried to turn back, but the stairs behind him had vanished.
The train's distant whistle echoed faintly above, a call he couldn't answer. The cavern grew colder, the whispers louder, until Caleb felt his own thoughts unraveling, memories mixing with dreams, reality slipping like water through his fingers. The last thing he saw before the darkness closed in was the child reaching out, whispering, "Stay with us." Outside, the rain fell softly on the forgotten tracks of Black Hollow Station.
erasing footprints. Hiding secrets meant never to be uncovered. Story 4. Echoes in the winter house. The snow had begun falling quietly as Marat approached the old house on Winter Road.
The forest around it was dense, skeletal trees stripped bare in the cold grey light of late afternoon. The house sat isolated, shuttered and sagging, swallowed by the weight of years in silence.
Marat had inherited the place from an aunt she barely remembered. A woman whispered about in the family for her strange habits and solitary life. She'd come to settle the estate, to gather what she could before selling it and returning to the city. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, a chill settled deep in her bones, an unnatural stillness, as if the house was holding its breath.
The floorboards groaned beneath her feet, echoing in the empty rooms.
The air was thick with dust and something else faint, metallic, like dried blood. The windows were frost-covered, distorting the pale winter light into eerie, shifting patterns. That first night, the house seemed alive. Soft tapping came from the walls, rhythmic, deliberate, but when Marat pressed her ear to the cold plaster, there was only silence. Her breath forked in the freezing air.
Somewhere in the house, a door creaked open, then shut again. Sleep was elusive. In the half-dark of dawn, Marat heard whispers threading through the cold, indecipherable voices that rose and fell like the wind. She tried to tell herself it was the house settling, the wind playing tricks.
But in the mirror, she saw something else. A shadow flickering behind her reflection, vanishing the moment she turned.
The temperature dropped suddenly, her breath clouding before her eyes. Over the days, the house revealed itself in fragments. Faint footprints appeared in the snow outside, but when she followed them, they dissolved into fresh powder. The clocks all ran slow, some stopping altogether. Faint music played from rooms empty of instruments, notes warped and distant.
One evening, Marat found an old diary tucked beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages told of a family lost to madness and sorrow. A mother who vanished in the winter, leaving behind a silence that gnawed at the walls. That night, as the storm raged outside, Marat awoke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing above her room.
She called out, but the only reply was a slow, heavy breathing that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. She sat frozen, listening as the footsteps circled and paused, then stopped abruptly. In the mirror's surface, a pale face appeared, eyes wide and unblinking, mouth stretched in a silent scream. Marat's last memory was the icy touch of a hand on her shoulder.
The house on Winter Road stands still beneath the snow, silent, but not empty, its echoes waiting for the next visitor to listen. Story 5. The Forgotten Room. Elena had never believed in ghosts.
But when she inherited her grandmother's old house at the edge of town, something about the place unsettled her deeply. It wasn't the creaking floors or the drafty windows. It was the room no one ever mentioned.
The door was painted shut, wedged tight with peeling layers of paint and years of neglect.
Elena found it behind the dusty curtains in the back wall,
a faint outline on the wallpaper marking its presence like a wound beneath the surface. On a night thick with rain, with thunder low and steady outside, Elena pried the door open.
The hinges groaned, releasing a stale, suffocating breath of air. The room beyond was smaller than she expected, bare except for a single wooden chair and a cracked mirror hanging crooked on the wall.
The air was colder than the rest of the house, and it felt like the room held its breath, waiting. Elena stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath her.
She glanced into the mirror and saw only her reflection, or so she thought.
Behind her, a shadow shifted, just out of the corner of her eye. She spun, but the room was empty.
Night after night, she returned to the forgotten room. Sometimes the chair would be in a different spot, or the mirror's surface rippled faintly, like water disturbed by a stone.
Then the whispers began soft, almost inaudible at first. They sounded like a lullaby, sung in a language Elena couldn't understand, but somehow felt deeply familiar.
Sleep became a distant memory. She heard footsteps pacing just beyond the door, scraping softly on the floorboards. Sometimes a soft knock, slow and deliberate, echoing from inside the walls. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Elena dared to touch the mirror's surface. Her fingers passed through the cold glass, sinking into darkness. A sudden chill gripped her. and she heard the whisper again, clearer this time.
Stay with us. Her reflection smiled back, but it wasn't her smile.
It was cruel, twisted, eyes-black paws of shadow.
Elena tried to pull away, but the mirror's surface clung like a second skin, pulling her in. Outside, the rain drowned out her screams.
The forgotten room's door swung shut once more, sealing her inside with a shadow.
Story 6. The Silence of Ash Grove. Ash Grove was a town left behind by time.
Nestled deep in a valley surrounded by dense, whispering woods, it had once been a bustling place, filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of community.
But now, only a few houses remained standing, and the rest was swallowed by wild brambles and creeping ivy. The roads were cracked and overgrown, and a silence had settled over the land like a thick fog, not just the absence of sound, but an oppressive quiet that seemed to press on the chest and dull the senses. Lydia arrived one grey afternoon, the sky heavy with the threat of rain.
She was a writer chasing a story, a whisper of something lost, a mystery tied to her family's past.
Her grandmother had told her of Ash Grove only in passing, warning her never to seek it out.
But the letters in the attic, fragile and yellowed, had led Lydia here to uncover secrets buried beneath the silence. She stepped onto the main street, her boots crunching on gravel mixed with broken glass and dried leaves. The air was thick and still. No birds sang. No wind stirred the skeletal branches overhead.
It was as if the entire town held its breath. Lydia passed the old general store, windows boarded up, a faded sign swinging in the breeze.
A single swing creaked slowly on a broken frame in the playground across the street.
Her footsteps echoed in the emptiness.
Inside the remaining houses, she found relics of lives abruptly abandoned. A child's doll half buried in dust, a cracked photograph of smiling faces yellowed by time, an overturned chair as if someone had fled in haste. That night, in the crumbling inn at the town's edge, Lydia tried to write, but the silence was thick, almost tangible, filling the room with a weight that pressed against her temples. Outside, the rain began to fall, first a soft drizzle, then a steady, relentless downpour that beat against the cracked window panes like a heartbeat. Sleep was a stranger.
Lydia lay awake, listening. The silence outside shifted, growing heavier, almost sentient.
Between the taps of rain, she heard faint sounds, footsteps, whispered words.
She strained her ears, but could catch nothing clear.
When dawn crept in pale and hesitant, Lydia ventured out again. The streets seemed different, shadows deeper, the silence louder. At the town square, she found the old well, its stone rim crumbled and worn.
Peering inside, she saw only darkness, the void swallowing the light like a gaping mouth.
From the depths came a faint sound, a whisper, a sobbing, barely audible, pulling at her heart.
Days passed in a strange loop.
Lydia's mind blurred between waking and dreaming. She swore she saw figures in the four-pale faces glimpsed through the rain, eyes watching, vanishing when she looked directly.
At night, the whispers grew into voices, echoing through the walls of her room. They spoke of things unsaid, of promises broken and debts unpaid. They called her name, pulling her toward the well. One evening, unable to resist, Lydia descended the stairs to the well with a lantern.
The walls of the well seemed to pulse, alive with a cold, crawling sensation. She shone the light down, and the darkness below shimmered, revealing faces twisted in agony, mouths moving soundlessly. A hand, pale and wet, grasped at the stone's edge.
Lydia stumbled back, heart pounding, breath shallow. The voices screamed in her ears, a deafening chorus begging, pleading.
She fled the town, the rain washing over her like cold judgment. But even now, when the storm rolls in and the silence deepens, she hears the whisper faint, insistent, echoing in the hollow spaces of her mind. Come back to Ash Grove.
Story 7. Beneath the hollow oak.
When Jonah inherited the old farmhouse from his estranged uncle, he didn't expect it to feel so empty, so hollow in every sense.
The house sat alone on the edge of a sprawling field, bordered by an ancient oak tree twisted with gnarled branches that clawed at the sky like skeletal hands.
The locals called it the Hollow Oak, whispering of strange happenings, but Jonah had never believed in such tales. The first days passed quietly, the wind sighing through the broken windows and the sun casting long shadows across the peeling wallpaper and dust-covered floorboards.
Yet something was wrong. A heaviness lingered in the air, subtle but pervasive, like a weight pressing down on his chest. At night, Jonah heard the creaking of the tree outside, but it was more than just branches scraping glass.
There was a rhythm deliberate, as if the tree itself was breathing, and beneath that sound, faint whispers threaded through the air, just beyond understanding.
One evening, a storm rolled in fast, thunder rumbling low as rain hammered the roof in relentless sheets.
Jonah lit the fireplace, trying to push back the cold that seemed to seep through the walls and into his bones. As the wind howled, the whispering grew louder, shaping into voices that spoke his name. He shook his head, telling himself it was just the storm playing tricks on his mind. But the next morning, he found the floor beneath the oak's window soaked, wet with dark stains that hadn't been there before. Days stretched on, each night more restless than the last. Shadows seemed to flicker in the corners of his vision, and the whispers grew urgent, like a secret trying to claw its way out of the darkness. One afternoon, exploring the fields, Jonah found a shallow hole beneath the oak's falling roots, hidden beneath fallen leaves and tangled vines. The soil was soft and damp, and inside the pit he saw fragments of bone, small, delicate, broken.
His stomach churned.
He covered the hole quickly, a cold dread pulling inside him.
That night, the whispers came again, but clearer this time. Remember.
Remember, Jonah dreamed of the oak in flames, its branches writhing like living things.
Faces appeared in the bark, mouths open in silent screams. Awaking in a sweat, he realized the voices weren't outside. They were inside him, a growing presence that filled his mind with ancient sorrow and rage. The farmhouse creaked and groaned as if alive.
The rain outside slowed to a dull murmur, and the whispers turned to a chant. Jonah understood then. The hollow oak was not just a tree. It was a prison, a sentinel holding something terrible beneath its roots. And now that terrible thing was waking.
Story 8. The House with No Doors.
The village of Greywater was a place people avoided, not because of its size or location, but because of the house at the edge of town, a structure that defied reason. It had no doors, none, no visible entrance or exit, just four solid walls covered in cracked plaster. Windows shuttered tight and staring blankly like dark eyes. When Daniel arrived, he was curious, skeptical even, an architect by trade. He'd heard the rumors and dismissed them as superstition, but the house intrigued him, a puzzle begging to be solved.
He set up camp in a small inn nearby, spending days sketching the house's exterior, searching for a hidden latch or seam.
The locals watched silently, their faces drawn and pale.
They warned him in hushed tones to leave before the night fell. One afternoon, Daniel found a small crack near the base of the wall, a narrow slit just wide enough to slip his hand inside.
He pried gently, and the plaster crumbled away to reveal a dark opening. The air inside was cold and stale, smelling faintly of earth and something metallic.
He squeezed through into a dim, narrow corridor that stretched endlessly ahead, the walls smooth and unyielding.
There were no doors, no windows, only the faint echo of his footsteps bouncing off the stone. Hours passed.
Daniel's flashlight flickered.
The air grew colder, heavier, pressing in on him like liquid.
He tried to turn back only to find the corridor twisted impossibly. The walls were shaping themselves, shifting with a slow, deliberate hunger.
Voices began to whisper indistinct at first, then growing louder, speaking in a language Daniel couldn't understand. They called to him, beckoning him deeper into the labyrinth.
He passed rooms that held nothing but shadows and silence.
Sometimes, in the corner of his vision, he saw figures pale, motionless, watching.
Days merged into nights.
Hunger gnawed at his insides, but the house did not let him leave. The walls closed around him like a tomb. In the deepest part of the house, Daniel found a room bathed in unnatural darkness. The floor was littered with old photographs, faces frozen in terror, eyes wide and pleading. He picked one up, his own face blurred and distorted. A sudden chill swept through the room. The whispers became screams. Daniel dropped the photo and ran. But the corridors twisted again, trapping him in an endless loop.
Outside, the village slept under a thick fog, the house standing silent and immovable, waiting for the next curious soul to vanish behind its walls with no doors. Story 9. Whispers from the Hollow Well.
The village of Dunwick was small and forgotten, tucked deep within a tangle of ancient woods. At its heart stood the old well, known simply as the Hollow Well at dark, yawning mouth sunk into cracked stones covered in moss.
For generations, the villagers avoided it, speaking of strange disappearances and eerie sounds that drifted from its depths at night. Elias came to Dunwick on a damp autumn afternoon, drawn by old letters he found in his late grandfather's study. They spoke of the well the voices heard beneath the earth, and a terrible secret that had been buried long ago.
The air was heavy with decay and dampness. As Elias approached the well, the wind stilled, and even the birds quieted, as if nature itself held its breath. The stones around the well were slick with marsh, and the water within was black and still, reflecting a sky bruised with clouds. He leaned over the edge, peering into the depths, but the darkness seemed endless, swallowing the light of his lantern.
A faint whisper echoed upwards, soft, unintelligible. Barely a breath on the wind. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. That night, as rain pattered softly on the wooden roof of the village inn, Elias dreamt of the well.
He saw faces in the water pale and distorted, mouths moving without sound.
Their eyes were empty hollows, staring straight into his soul. Waking in a sweat, Elias told the innkeeper of his dreams.
The old woman's eyes grew distant as she spoke of the well's history, a place where the earth had swallowed those who dared to listen too closely, where the past and present bled together in an endless echo.
Days passed in a haze. Elias found himself drawn back to the well repeatedly. Each time, the whispers grew louder, shifting from unintelligible murmurs to haunting pleas.
Come
down, they seemed to say.
One evening, the village was swallowed by a thick fog.
Elias stood at the well's edge, lantern flickering.
The whispers surrounded him, urgent, desperate.
A cold hand brushed his wrist.
He looked down to see a face emerging from the water pale, eyes wide and hollow, lips parting in a silent scream.
Elias stumbled back, heart pounding.
The villagers watched from their windows, faces pale and unreadable.
He knew then that the well was a gateway and mouth to a darkness beneath the earth, hungry and waiting.
The next morning, the well was empty. No water remained, only silence. Elias was gone. The village returned to its quiet. But sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, the faintest whispers rise from the hollow well, calling out to anyone who will listen.
Story 10. The Lighthouse Keeper's Last Watch.
Miles from the nearest town, perched on a jagged cliff overlooking a storm-ravaged sea, stood the old lighthouse. It had been abandoned for years, its light extinguished, its walls weathered and scarred by salt and wind. But when Samuel arrived to take up the post as the new keeper, the lighthouse seemed alive in a way he hadn't expected, watching, waiting. The first days passed in a dull routine. Samuel maintained the mechanism, climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room, and scanned the endless horizon.
The sea was a restless, grey expanse, waves crashing against the rocks below, air thick with the scent of brine and decay. At night, the wind screamed like a chorus of ghosts, rattling the windows and making the shadows dance. Samuel felt a growing unease, a sense that the lighthouse was holding a secret in its very stones.
On the third night, he heard it, a low, mournful song carried on the wind, almost human, but not quite. It seeped through the cracks in the walls, wrapping around him like a cold hand. He followed the sound down to the cellar, where the air was damp and thick with mildew.
The singing grew louder, a haunting melody that stirred memories he couldn't place.
In the dark, he found a door he hadn't seen before, hidden behind old crates. It was heavy and warped, covered in rusted ironwork. The song poured through its cracks, pulling him closer.
With trembling hands, Samuel forced it open and descended a narrow staircase spiraling into blackness.
At the bottom, a cavern opened beneath the lighthouse, a hollow space carved from ancient stone, walls slick with salt and water.
And there, sitting on the cold floor, was a woman. Her hair was like seaweed, tangled and dripping, and her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. She sang without words, a song older than the sea itself, drawing Samuel deeper into her gaze. He tried to speak, to ask who she was, but the words caught in his throat.
The air grew thick, suffocating. The woman reached out, fingers cold as the ocean depths, touching his face with a sorrow that felt endless. Samuel understood then she was a spirit bound to the lighthouse, trapped by grief and rage, waiting for someone to share her eternal watch. The song swelled, drowning out the crashing waves and the howling wind.
Samuel felt himself slipping, fall beneath the surface of waking into a dark abyss. When the morning light broke, the lighthouse stood silent once more. The door to the cellar was closed, no sign of the hidden cavern or the woman. Samuel was gone. The sea claimed the lighthouse's secret, and the wind whispered the song to no one but itself. Story 11. The Lighthouse Keeper's Last Watch.
Miles from the nearest town, perched on a jagged cliff overlooking a storm-ravaged sea, stood the old lighthouse. It had been abandoned for years, its light extinguished, its walls weathered and scarred by salt and wind. But when Samuel arrived to take up the post as the new keeper, the lighthouse seemed alive in a way he hadn't expected. Waiting. The first days passed in a dull routine. Samuel maintained the mechanism, climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room, and scanned the endless horizon.
The sea was a restless, grey expanse, waves crashing against the rocks below, air thick with the scent of brine and decay. At night, the wind screamed like a chorus of ghosts, rattling the windows and making the shadows dance. Samuel felt a growing unease, a sense that the lighthouse was holding a secret in its very stones.
On the third night, he heard it, a low, mournful song carried on the wind, almost human, but not quite. It seeped through the cracks in the wall, wrapping around him like a cold hand. He followed the sound down to the cellar, where the air was damp and thick with mildew.
The singing grew louder, a haunting melody that stirred memories he couldn't place.
In the dark, he found a door he hadn't seen before, hidden behind old crates.
It was heavy and warped, covered in rusted ironwork.
The song poured through its cracks, pulling him closer.
With trembling hands, Samuel forced it open and descended a narrow staircase spiraling into blackness.
At the bottom, a cavern opened beneath the lighthouse, a hollow space carved from ancient stone, walls slick with salt and water.
And there, sitting on the cold floor, was a woman. Her hair was like seaweed, tangled and dripping, and her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. She sang without words, a song older than the sea itself, drawing Samuel deeper into her gaze. He tried to speak, to ask who she was, but the words caught in his throat.
The air grew thick, suffocating. The woman reached out, fingers cold as the ocean depths, touching his face with a sorrow that felt endless. Samuel understood then she was a spirit bound to the lighthouse, trapped by grief and rage, waiting for someone to share her eternal watch. The song swelled, drowning out the crashing waves and the howling wind.
Samuel felt himself slipping, fall beneath the surface of waking into a dark abyss. When the morning light broke, the lighthouse stood silent once more. The door to the cellar was closed, no sign of the hidden cavern or the woman. Samuel was gone. The sea claimed the lighthouse's secret, and the wind whispered the song to no one but itself. Story 12. The Mirror in the Attic. The old house had been in Mara's family for generations, a sprawling Victorian relic sitting at the edge of a forgotten town.
After her parents passed away, she inherited it, a place thick with memories and dust. But it was the attic that held her attention, a shadowed space filled with forgotten trunks, faded photographs, and a single, tall mirror standing alone against the far wall. The mirror was peculiar. Its frame was carved with twisting vines and strange symbols that seemed almost alive in the flickering light of her candle. It had no glass, just a smooth, dark surface that swallowed the room's shadows. At first, Mara thought it was just a decorative oddity, but soon she began to notice strange things. The mirror's surface rippled faintly, like water disturbed by a gentle breeze. Reflections shifted and warped, showing scenes that didn't match. The attic, a garden in bloom, a room bathed in moonlight,
a figure standing just beyond view. She reached out one night, fingers trembling, and touched the mirror's surface. The cold that radiated from it was unnatural, like ice flowing over her skin.
The attic's air grew heavy, suffocating.
Mira's reflection smiled, but it wasn't her smile.
It was slow, deliberate, and filled with something dark. Nights passed with the mirror's whispers growing louder.
It spoke in a language she didn't know but somehow understood. It called to her, promising secrets, knowledge, even escape from loneliness.
Sleep became elusive. Shadows moved in the corners of the attic. The mirror showed her memories that weren't her, spaces she'd never seen, places that didn't exist.
One evening, Mira awoke to find her reflection missing.
The mirror's surface was black and still, as if empty.
Panic rose in her chest.
She tried to look away, but the mirror held her gaze, pulling her closer.
Suddenly, she saw it, a hand reaching out from within the dark glass. It grasped for her, cold and relentless. Mira stumbled back, heart pounding, but the mirror's surface cracked like ice.
The attic was plunged into darkness. When morning came, the house was silent. The attic door was locked from the inside.
Mira was nowhere to be found.
The mirror remained, its black surface still and waiting, ready to claim the next soul drawn by its silent promise.
Story 13. The Watcher in the Walls.
When Eleanor moved into the old apartment building on Maple Street, she expected a quiet life. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood worn but friendly enough. But the moment she stepped into her unit, a cold sensation settled over her, as if unseen eyes had been waiting for her arrival. The apartment was small, with peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, leaving behind a thin layer of dust and a faint smell of smoke. Eleanor tried to shake off the unease and set about making the place her own.
That night, the silence was thick and heavy, broken only by the soft groans of the building settling.
But sometimes, beneath the creaks and sighs, she heard something else, a faint scratching, like nails dragging along plaster, coming from inside the walls.
She pressed her ear against the cold surface, straining to hear.
The sound stopped. When she pulled away, a slow, deliberate tapping began, 3 sharp knocks, then a pause, then 2 more.
Eleanor's skin prickled. She told herself it was rats or plumbing settling, but the pattern was too deliberate, too rhythmic.
Days passed, and the noises grew bolder. Shadows flickered just beyond her vision. Her dreams became restless, haunted by a figure watching from dark corners, its eyes glowing faintly in the gloom.
One evening, Eleanor found a narrow gap between 2 wall panels. Peering inside, she saw nothing but darkness, yet the scratching continued, coming closer, as if something was trying to escape. Determined to uncover the truth, she pried open a section of the wall.
Inside was a small cavity, halved deep and narrow, containing fragments of old letters, photographs, and a small, withered doll.
The letters spoke of a tenant long gone, someone who had disappeared without a trace decades ago. The final note was a desperate plea. It watches, always watching. I cannot leave. That night, the scratching turned into soft whispers, calling her name.
The tapping grew frantic, echoing through the walls like a heartbeat. Eleanor tried to flee, but found the apartment transformed. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows deepening into solid shapes. In the darkness, the Watcher revealed itself, a pale, gaunt figure with hollow eyes, trapped between walls, craving release.
Eleanor's scream was swallowed by the silence.
The apartment returned to quiet. The scratches ceased.
Outside, the building stood still, waiting for its next tenant to hear the Watcher's call. Story 14. The Forgotten Train.
The abandoned train station sat at the edge of town, swallowed by weeds and rust.
Locals avoided it, speaking in hushed tones of a ghost train that ran in the dead of night, a train that never stopped, passing through without a sound, carrying lost souls.
Lucas, a restless photographer drawn to forgotten places, arrived just before dusk. The sky was bruised purple, and the air held the faint scent of rain.
He crossed the cracked platform, camera ready, searching for the perfect shot.
The station was silent, except for the distant drip of water from a broken pipe and the rustling of leaves in the wind. The tracks disappeared into darkness, swallowed by the encroaching forest. As twilight deepened, Lucas noticed something strange. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, and a low hum began to rise, barely audible at first. The platform lights flickered, casting long shadows that twisted and stretched.
He aimed his camera down the tracks.
Nothing.
But then a faint glow appeared, a soft, pulsing light, like the flicker of an old lantern, moving closer.
Lucas's heart quickened. The glow grew brighter, revealing the outline of a train emerging from the mist, its windows dark and empty. No sound of wheels, no whistle, just the eerie, slow approach. The train slowed near the platform, but no one stepped off. The air shimmered with a chill that sank deep into Lucas's bones. From the windows came whispers, faint, fragmented voices, calling out names he didn't recognize but somehow felt drawn to.
Suddenly, the train door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dim, empty interior. Lucas stepped forward, curiosity overpowering caution.
Inside, the train was frozen in time, dusty seats, cracked glass, faded posters peeling from the walls. The whispers grew louder, weaving around him like a cold wind.
He felt eyes on him, unseen but pressing, waiting.
Lucas moved toward the conductor's cabin. The door creaked open, revealing a figure in an old uniform, face obscured by shadow. The figure spoke in a voice like distant thunder. "You shouldn't be here."
Lucas tried to back away, but the train lurched forward.
The platform and station disappeared, replaced by endless darkness, the whispers swelling into a cacophony of sorrow and despair. He was trapped on the forgotten train, forever moving through the void, a passenger among ghosts, lost between worlds. Back in town, the station stood empty, the night still and silent, waiting for the next curious soul to hear the call of the forgotten train.
Story 15. The room at the end of the hall.
When Clara took the night shift at the old hospital, she thought the hours would pass quietly. The building was ancient, its walls steeped in history, its corridors long and winding like veins through a living body.
But there was one room she never wanted to enter. Room 217.
The door was always shut, its faded number barely visible beneath chipped paint.
Staff whispered about it, patients who vanished. Strange noises at odd hours, shadows flickering behind a glass panel.
One rainy night, the power flickered, plunging the hospital into brief darkness.
When the emergency lights kicked in, Clara noticed the door to room 217 was slightly ajar. A cold draft seeped out, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent. Curiosity pulled her forward, heart pounding. She pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. The room was empty except for an old hospital bed draped in yellow sheets and a cracked mirror hanging crooked on the wall.
The air was thick, heavy with something unspoken. As she moved deeper, the door slammed shut behind her.
The temperature dropped, and the lights dimmed until only the mirror reflected her pale, trembling face.
Clara's reflection began to shift. Her eyes darkened, her expression twisting into a cruel, mocking grin that wasn't her own. She stumbled back, but the room seemed to stretch, walls elongating, ceiling rising like an endless void. Whispers echoed softly, voices of past patients lost to time.
They begged for release, their pleas weaving through the air like thread.
The mirror cracked, webbing fractures spidering across the glass, distorting the reflection into 1,000 broken shards.
One shard detached, floating in the air, revealing a glimpse of another world, a place of shadows and silence where time stood still.
Clara felt herself pulled toward the shard, a cold hand reaching from the darkness, fingers curling around her wrist. With a sudden jolt, she slammed into the door, which flew open. She collapsed into the hallway, gasping for breath. The door to room 217 closed behind her, sealing itself without a sound. From that night on, Clara avoided the hall entirely, but sometimes, late at night, she could hear the faint sound of the mirror cracking, and a whispered warning that seemed to drift just beyond hearing. The hospital was old, and some rooms were better left unopened, and to quiet, the scratches ceased.
Outside, the building stood still, waiting for its next tenant to hear the watcher's call. Story 16. The echoes beneath the floorboards.
When Jonathan inherited the old farmhouse from his late uncle, he saw it as a fresh started place to escape the city's noise and rebuild.
The house sat alone amid rolling fields, its weathered wood and peeling paint a testament to years of neglect.
But the silence here was different, heavy, almost alive.
The first night, rain hammered against the roof, the steady drumming soothing at first.
But beneath the steady patter, Jonathan heard something else. Faint tapping, almost like footsteps, coming from beneath the floorboards.
He chalked it up to settling wood and old plumbing. Yet each night, the noises grew more distinct.
Scratches, taps, then soft whispers carried on the drafty air beneath the floor. One evening, after a long day clearing brush, Jonathan found himself drawn to the creaking hallway floor. Pressing his ear close, he heard murmurs of voice, low and mournful, whispering a name he did not recognize. Curiosity consumed him. He pried up a loose board near the stairs and peered into the dark void beneath the house. The crawl space was narrow and cramped, smelling of damp earth and rot. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so thick it pressed against his eardrums. Jonathan dropped the board back in place, heart racing. That night, sleep eluded him. Shadows seemed to shift beneath his bedroom door, and the tapping beneath the floor grew urgent, frantic. In the days that followed, Jonathan found old newspaper clippings hidden inside a drawer, stories about a family who'd lived here decades ago. They vanished without a trace, leaving no clues, only rumors of strange happenings and voices beneath the house.
As the nights wore on, the tapping became footsteps pacing beneath the floorboards, circling the house in restless rhythm.
Jonathan began to see figures in the corner of his vision, pale shapes watching silently from the shadows.
His reflection in mirrors grew distorted, showing glimpses of hollow eyes and twisted mouths.
One stormy night, the whispers became voices, clear and insistent, calling him down.
He found himself crawling beneath the floorboards, heart pounding, drawn by a force he couldn't resist.
Beneath the house was a small chamber, dirt floor and crumbling stone walls.
In the center lay a faded, broken doll, its glass eyes staring blankly upward.
Jonathan reached out, and the chamber flooded with cold darkness. The walls seemed to close in, and the whispers became screams.
Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing over the silent farmhouse.
Jonathan was never seen again, but sometimes beneath the floorboards, the tapping still echoes a restless heartbeat in the dark.
Story 17. The quiet town of Greystone.
Greystone was the kind of town people passed through without stopping, quiet, orderly, almost to perfect.
When Rachel arrived, she was drawn by a job offer at the local library, hoping for a fresh start.
But from the moment she stepped at the bus, something felt off, a subtle wrongness beneath the town's calm surface. The streets were empty, the houses neat but lifeless.
No children played, no dogs barked. Even the trees seemed to lean away, their branches twisted like fingers.
Rachel noticed how the townsfolk avoided her gaze, speaking in hushed tones.
When she asked about the town's history, the librarian gave vague answers, mentions of old tragedies, disappearances, and warnings not to ask too many questions. At night, the silence was thick, broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards in her rented room.
But soon, Rachel began hearing whispers outside her window, soft, unintelligible voices carried on the wind. She started dreaming of the town's past, faces she didn't know but felt connected to, events she had no memory of. Each dream was soaked in dread, a slow unraveling of something dark buried beneath Greystone's calm facade.
One evening, exploring the edge of town, Rachel found a well hidden in the woods.
Its stone walls were cracked and moss-covered, the opening sealed with heavy iron bars.
From its depths came a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone or something trying to get out.
As days passed, Rachel's grip on reality weakened.
She saw shadowy figures lurking just beyond sight, felt eyes watching from every corner. The townsfolk's behavior grew more strange, smiles too wide, movements too smooth.
One night, she woke to find her reflection missing from the mirror. Panicked, she raced outside, only to see the town bathed in an unnatural fog. From the mist emerged the whispered voices, growing louder, calling her name. Rachel ran toward the well, the tapping now frantic.
She reached the iron bars, which began to bend and warp as if alive. Before her eyes, the ground split open, revealing a dark abyss pulsing with cold, malevolent light.
The townsfolk appeared, their faces twisted in hollow smiles, eyes black voids. Rachel understood then the town was a prison, holding something ancient and hungry beneath its surface. The last thing she heard was the tapping, steady and endless, echoing from the hollow well.
Story 17. The quiet town of Greystone.
Greystone was the kind of town people passed through without stopping, quiet, orderly, almost to perfect.
When Rachel arrived, she was drawn by a job offer at the local library, hoping for a fresh start.
But from the moment she stepped off the bus, something felt off, a subtle wrongness beneath the town's calm surface. The streets were empty, the houses neat but lifeless.
No children played, no dogs barked. Even the trees seemed to lean away, their branches twisted like fingers.
Rachel noticed how the townsfolk avoided her gaze, speaking in hushed tones.
When she asked about the town's history, the librarian gave vague answers, mentions of old tragedies, disappearances, and warnings not to ask too many questions. At night, the silence was thick, broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards in her rented room.
But soon, Rachel began hearing whispers outside her window, soft, unintelligible voices carried on the wind. She started dreaming of the town's past, faces she didn't know but felt connected to, events she had no memory of. Each dream was soaked in dread, a slow unraveling of something dark buried beneath Greystone's calm facade.
One evening, exploring the edge of town, Rachel found a well hidden in the woods.
Its stone walls were cracked and moss-covered, the opening sealed with heavy iron bars.
From its depths came a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone or something trying to get out.
As days passed, Rachel's grip on reality weakened.
She saw shadowy figures lurking just beyond sight, felt eyes watching from every corner. The townsfolk's behavior grew more strange, smiles too wide, movements too smooth.
One night, she woke to find her reflection missing from the mirror. Panicked, she raced outside, only to see the town bathed in an unnatural fog. From the mist emerged the whispered voices, grown louder, calling her name. Rachel ran toward the well, the tapping now frantic.
She reached the iron bars, which began to bend and warp as if alive. Before her eyes, the ground split open, revealing a dark abyss pulsing with cold, malevolent light.
The townsfolk appeared, their faces twisted in hollow smiles, eyes black voids. Rachel understood then the town was a prison, holding something ancient and hungry beneath its surface. The last thing she heard was the tapping, steady and endless, echoing from the hollow well.
Story 18. Whispers from the Hollow.
The village of Ashgrove was a place swallowed by fog and time, nestled in a valley where the sun rarely pierced the thick canopy of trees. Anna had come seeking solitude, renting a small cottage on the edge of the forest after the city became too loud and unforgiving. But Ashgrove had its own silence, one that weighed heavy and deep. From her first night, Anna was plagued by whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs drifting on the breeze, threading through the cracks in her cottage walls. The villagers dismissed it as the wind, but she knew it was something else. The whispers grew louder with each passing night, weaving into her dreams, filling them with shadowed figures that watched but never spoke directly.
She awoke with a pounding heart, cold sweat clinging to her skin. Curiosity battled fear. One evening, Anna followed the voices into the forest, the fog curling around her like fingers. She came upon a clearing where the trees arched over a deep, dark hollow in the earth, the source of the whispers.
Peering in, she saw nothing but darkness, yet the voices seeped upward like smoke. Compelled, she lowered herself into the hollow, fingers clutching cold stone.
Inside, the air was thick and heavy, smelling of earth and decay.
The whispers twisted into words she could almost understand, names, warnings, fragments of stories lost to time. Suddenly, the walls seemed to pulse, alive with unseen presence.
Anna's breath hitched as shapes moved just beyond sight, shadowy faces with hollow eyes, mouths agape in silent screams.
Panic surged, but her limbs felt heavy, rooted to the spot. The whispers turned urgent, a chorus demanding release.
She scrambled back, but the earth beneath her feet trembled, splitting with a sound like breaking bones. From the hollow, cold hands reached out, grasping for her. Anna fled through the forest, the whispers chasing, growing louder, louder until she burst into the village square.
The villagers stood silent, eyes void, faces eerily serene.
No one leaves Ashgrove, the voice whispered inside her mind.
Back in her cottage, Anna sealed the windows and doors, but the whispers followed, pressing against the walls, promising they would wait, patiently, until she gave in.
Outside, the hollow breathed, endless and hungry, beneath the thick fog. Story 19. The Silent Watcher. Mark had always been drawn to the wilderness's raw, untamed beauty and the silence that allowed his mind to wander free. So when he found the old cabin deep in the woods, he thought it would be the perfect place to escape the noise of the city and write.
The cabin was isolated, surrounded by towering pines and a thick carpet of fallen leaves. It creaked and groaned with age, the windows sparked and dulled.
At first, Mark welcomed the solitude. The rhythmic tapping of rain on the roof, the soft rustle of wind through the trees.
But the silence soon became oppressive. He noticed the feeling of being watched, an unseen gaze heavy on his back whenever he stepped outside.
At night, shadows gathered just beyond the edges of his vision, disappearing when he turned.
One evening, as twilight deepened into darkness, Mark saw a figure standing at the tree line, a tall, thin silhouette, still as a statue.
When he blinked, it was gone.
Sleep was elusive. His dreams were invaded by a dark presence, a watcher with hollow eyes that followed him through misty forests and crumbling ruins. The nights grew colder, and the cabin's creak sounded like whispers. Mark began to hear faint footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, pacing the perimeter. Desperate, he ventured into the woods with a flashlight.
The beam cut through the fog, illuminating twisted branches and moss-covered stones.
Deeper into the forest, he found signs, scratches on trees, a circle of stones, and footprints that led nowhere. The watcher was real. It waited. Mark's mind unraveled as days bled into nights. He saw the figure everywhere reflected in windows, standing behind trees, a constant presence that neither spoke nor moved. On the final night, Mark barricaded himself inside the cabin, heart hammering. The footsteps grew louder, circling the cabin.
Then, silence. He dared a glance out the window.
The watcher was there, its hollow eyes fixed on him. Mark turned away, but the darkness seeped inside, wrapping around him like a shroud.
When morning came, the cabin stood empty, the door swinging in the breeze. The watcher had claimed its vigil. Story 20. The light in the window. Evelyn had never been one to believe in ghosts or legends. When she moved into the small, weather-worn house at the edge of the forest, it was for the quieter chance to write her novel far from the city's clamor. The townspeople were polite but distant, exchanging wary glances when she mentioned the house's history. Old Harris lived here, an elderly man had said. He vanished one winter, left everything behind. Some say you can see his light still, burning late at night.
Evelyn laughed it off.
A light was just a light. The first few nights passed without incident. The house creaked with age, and the forest whispered secrets in the wind. But then, as darkness settled thick and heavy, she noticed it, a faint glow flickering in the upstairs window, long after she turned off her own lights. She told herself it was a neighbor, or a street lamp's reflection, but when she checked, the neighboring houses were dark and still. Curiosity pulled her toward the stairs.
The light was soft, golden, almost alive. At the top, the room was empty except for the old lantern resting on the windowsill, its flame steady, burning without fuel.
Evelyn reached out to touch it.
The moment her fingers brushed the glass, the flame pulsed, casting shadows that danced like whispers on the walls. She stepped back, heart racing. The window fogged over, and through the glass, a figure appeared, a man in tattered clothes, face worn by time, eyes filled with sorrow. He mouthed something she couldn't hear. Nights grew colder. The light appeared again and again, each time flickering in different rooms, always accompanied by a low hum that seemed to seep from the walls. Evelyn's dreams were invaded by memories, not her own frozen winters, last promises, footsteps fading into snow.
One night, she woke to find a lantern gone. replaced by a note scrawled in trembling handwriting. "Don't look outside."
Fear prickled her skin, but she peered out anyway. The forest was empty, silent.
Yet, in the far distance, a single lantern bobbed through the trees, moving steadily closer. Evelyn closed the curtains, but the light's glow seeped through the cracks, chasing away the dark.
She was never alone in that house again, and sometimes, when the wind howls just right, you can still see the lanterns glow a beacon for the last, waiting in the cold night.